Hey guys, and welcome back to Brexit. Brexit England, Northern Ireland, and Eastern Europe. And in Brexit England, Nigel Farage has described Brexit as a disaster. What? Nigel Farage has described Brexit as a disaster. I know what you're thinking. What? Yes, Nigel Farage believes that Brexit is an absolute disaster. And you have to say to, oh, Nigel, who the hell knew that Brexit was going to be an absolute disaster? Apart from all of the people that was telling you Brexit will be an absolute disaster. Like, all the EU commissioners, all the people in this country who were telling you it was going to be an absolute disaster. I mean, Barack Obama told you it was going to be an absolute disaster. Everybody, right, who knew anything about how the world works told Nigel Farage it was going to be an absolute disaster. But they took Nigel Farage round to all the major studios. When Nigel Farage should really be a heckler. Nigel Farage should be at the back of the room shouting stuff out. He should never be on centre stage. Never should he have ever been anywhere near the centre stage. But they pushed Nigel Farage all over the country, everywhere. Right? Had this man mainstream, LBC, right? Question Time. Nigel Farage. The thing with Nigel Farage, he looks like a man who has just come out of like the local golf club. He's not a Nick Griffin type character. He's much more suave and much more sophisticated. And the way he puts stuff, right? But the truth is, right, he's one of those people. He's just howling at the moon on a regular basis. That's all. And now Nigel Farage, he wants to blame the politicians. Right, because the politicians are a bunch of useless twats. And I agree with Nigel Farage on that. Right, the politicians are a bunch of useless twats. But they're not it's not their fault that Brexit hasn't worked. That's nothing to do with them. I mean, they couldn't make it work. Even if Brexit could have worked, they couldn't make it work anyway. But the whole point is Brexit could have never worked. I mean, it was always going to be a complete disaster. Imagine if you're in a union, right, and that union's got its rules, it's got its regulations, right, and you say, you know what, I'm stepping out of the union, but we're going to be better off than we was inside, right, and most of our main part of our business is going to be going there still, but we're not going to adhere to any of their rules. I mean, at this point, normally I would say like, a brain surgeon or like a rocket scientist. It doesn't need a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist to tell you, yeah, that's just a lot of bollocks. Right? It doesn't need someone who is stacking shelves, right, in a local supermarket that can tell you, yeah, that if you don't want to adhere to the rules, right, then you're not going to be allowed in the club. That's how it works, right? You're not allowed in the club. You don't adhere to the club's rules, then you don't go to the club, right? So now we've decided, well, actually, we'd be better off outside. And we're still, right, you had people like Jacob Rees-Mogg telling us, oh, well, your food prices will be cheaper. Shoes will be much cheaper for peasants. Clothing will be much cheaper. Just telling us, just saying, this is the thing with the whole thing with Brexit, yeah, is these people all the time, they was just saying stuff, right? They're putting up against, Andrea Jenkins and, or Nadine Dorries up against, experts, people who are, people who work within the EU, right? And these guys are just like, no, we will still be able to export to the EU exactly the same as we was before. There will never be any queues at Dover. Well, of course, that was always, what amazes me, yeah, is how they've actually managed to get this passed. But, they just relied on like bigotry and xenophobia, right? And that I've always said, I think that Brexit's it's just something that's hilariously funny. But, there has to come a stage, yeah, where I have to start taking this shit serious. Right? Even though, to be honest, right, I just, when I look at people like Nigel Farage, I say that, that people like that, they deserve Brexit. Right, the rest of us who, we fought our hardest to stop this country, right, from slitting its own throat. We don't deserve we don't deserve this. We don't deserve, right, that, if we go swimming, we're gonna end up with a mouthful of shit. Right? We don't deserve these the highest food costs. We don't deserve. We used to have. This used to once be, right, a country where, food prices was decent. I mean, compared to what we've got now, because our food prices, what we, I'm doing a video a bit later as well, because this one I'm just doing about this one is just purely about Brexit. But so food prices, right, have never been as high as we've got them now. You just have to wonder what it is, yeah, that was going through people's minds, right? Because if you look at the situation with like employment, so much companies have gone bankrupt, right? Simply because they can't get staff. You've got farmers, right, who are not turning on their greenhouses because the energy cost is just too high, right, to produce in this country. I'd say it's just too high because it's an absolute disaster. Right. When I say disaster, it's an absolute disaster. Just the whole of Brexit has been an absolute disaster. But I just wonder to myself, yeah, just like, if you look at the whole world, yeah, is breaking into blocks everywhere. They're breaking into blocks. Now you've got companies, right, that are saying, listen, we are not coming to Britain because every other country is connected to the globe, to the world, and Britain is disconnected from the world. So you've got companies that are blatantly saying, well, we're not, you're not even in the long list, but let alone the short list. You're not even in the long list for us to come to you when we're building in Europe. It doesn't make any sense us bringing our business to you because you've cut yourself off from your biggest market, right? Which has affected all of our employment. You've got fields of rotting fruit. I don't, probably not happening anymore because a lot of the farmers are just not growing anything in there, and some of them I think have probably just started to rewild their fields because they might be able to get grants and that type of thing if they do that. So some of them might have just started to do that, but so because they can't get the staff over, and then if you look at the the numbers. Obviously, Brexit was supposed to take down the immigration numbers, right? And say, well, if you realise that Brexit's going to take down the immigration numbers, then you understand, yeah, that a lot of businesses can't operate. How can they operate in this situation? They can't operate, right, when they can't get the people into this country to pick the fruit and all those type of things. They can't get the people to do that type of work. Right, and it's all seasonal work, So when British people don't, British people can't really do that work because it's seasonal. Right? People want full-time jobs. So so cutting yourself off from that market, right, has led to us having less of of the Spanish and the Portuguese doctors and nurses. Right, and the Italians as well. There's been a lot of Italian doctors and nurses as well in this country, right? But a lot of those people don't want to come to this country anymore, simply because it's a very hostile environment for all these people. But Nigel Farage believes that Brexit is a disaster, and to me, that's like, I just look at it like this. I'm going to give you an analogy, right, of what Brexit really is, especially for for what they gave the politicians to work with. They just said to the politicians, right, look, Brexit, build that house, all right, but you have to do it with no tools. Right, so how are you going to put the cement together? But this is what the politicians have got to work with. How are you going to put the cement together? Right? You know, how are you going to bang stuff into the wall? You're going to bang stuff into the wall with your fist, nails, or you're going to get, maybe you might be able to get some push fit nails and some push fit screws. But how are you going to do all this type of stuff? Right? How are you going to put how are you going to get the slates on the roof? You got no ladders because there's no tools. You got no. So how are you going to build a house, right? Or you say to a motor mechanic, right? I need you to put a starter motor on that car, right? And all you've got to use is this Phillips screwdriver. I think the mechanic's going to look at you exactly like that, right? And say, what the fuck do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get the bolts out? But that's what they gave the politicians to work with. That's what Nigel Farage, right, gave the politicians to work with after he spent his whole life, right, telling us, do you know what? He's going to get this country out of the EU. He even used to go over there and insult the EU commissioners on our behalf on a regular basis. Nigel Farage just go and insult them. Right? You've got people like, what's his name? Forte. I can't remember his first name, but Forte. I think his dad was his dad started the hotel chain. But he's Italian. He's British Italian, right? So he's like, well, and I think he gave the Tories something like £100,000 for Brexit, right? So he's like, well, I'm going to Brexit's an absolute disaster, right? So I might go and live in Italy. I might go and live in the EU because he's got the option. He's probably a dual citizen. He's probably he might be a dual citizen anyway. If not, he'll be able to get an Italian passport because he is proper minted, so he's going to be able to get like an Italian passport anyway, right? So all of these people have convinced, right, all of the working classes and the poor and the much less well off than them, right, that Brexit will be brilliant for them. And now look at them. They're slinging themselves off to places like Italy or Boris Johnson's dad, France, right? Is it Nigel Lawson? I think he's another one. I think he's in France. I think he is. But so a lot of these prominent people who told us that Brexit was going to be absolutely brilliant for us, right? A lot of them are taking their ass and gone living in the EU. Because they know how much of an absolute disaster it is, right? And they managed to fool all these people into voting into something, right, that was going to be absolutely disastrous for them. You have to wonder how these people even sleep at night. But when the EU commissioner said, there is a special place in hell for the people who brought us Brexit. My friends, I've gone 3 minutes over on this video, but I'm going to be doing a little video. I'm going to be doing another video in a little while. So, I want to speak about some daily products, some daily news. But I just thought that Nigel Farage coming out and saying how much of a disaster Brexit really is and blaming the politicians, right, is just like. It's just, all you can do is just shake your head and wave your finger furiously and say, Nigel Farage, you absolute git. My friends, this is By Any Means Necessary. I'm VMC John Ribbs. It was really nice to speak to you guys. Comments below.